Artemis II has already done the impossible. 4 astronauts, Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen, have just traveled farther from Earth than any humans alive. 252,756 miles. A number that broke a record. Held since Apollo 13 in 1970. They looped behind the far side of the moon. They watched the Earth disappear behind the lunar horizon. They named a crater after the commander's late wife. They saw a solar eclipse that no one on Earth could see. And now, after 10 days in deep space, they are heading home. But none of that guarantees a safe ending, because to come home, Orion must slam into Earth's atmosphere at nearly 25,000 miles per hour, endure external temperatures approaching 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, vanish behind a wall of superheated plasma for 6 minutes, and trust that every system, every layer of protection, performs exactly as designed. The most dangerous part of Artemis II is not the launch. It is not the lunar flyby. It is the last 13 minutes before splashdown. And in those 13 minutes, there is almost no room for error. This is what that return looks like. Most people think the hardest part of going to the moon is getting there. And that makes sense. The launch is dramatic. The rocket is enormous. The sound alone can be felt miles away. When SLS lifted off from Pad 39B at Kennedy Space Center on April 1st, 2026, it carried the dreams of an entire generation that grew up being told the moon was no longer within reach. But the truth is, going to the moon has always been the easier half of the equation. It is coming back that tries to kill you. During Apollo, NASA engineers used to say that re-entry was the price of admission. It was the one phase of the mission that could not be rehearsed. You could simulate launch, you could practice docking, you could drill emergency procedures 1,000 times, but you could not recreate the violence of hitting Earth's atmosphere at interplanetary speed. Not on the ground, not in a simulator, not in orbit. You just had to trust the math and ride it through. And that is exactly where Artemis II is right now. The crew has completed their lunar flyby. They have exited the moon's sphere of gravitational influence. They have tested Orion systems in deep space, run through the procedures, photographed things no human eyes have seen in over 50 years. But the hardest part? That begins in the final hours of the mission, on flight day 10. When the Earth stops being a destination and starts being a wall. Let's talk about the journey home. Artemis II uses what is called a free return trajectory. This means the spacecraft follows a path shaped by the combined gravity of the Earth and the Moon. After swinging around the far side of the Moon on April 6th, Orion does not need a massive engine burn to come home. Gravity does most of the work. The spacecraft curves back toward Earth on a ballistic arc that was set in motion before the crew even left low Earth orbit. But free return does not mean hands-off. On the way back, mission control and the crew perform a series of return trajectory correction burns. These are small, precise thruster firings that fine-tune the angle at which Orion will hit the atmosphere. The last of these burns, known as Return Trajectory Correction 3, fires for only 8 seconds. It changes the spacecraft's velocity by just 4.2 feet per second. That sounds tiny. But at the scale of orbital mechanics, that small nudge is the difference between landing safely in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego and overshooting into open water, or worse, bouncing off the atmosphere entirely and drifting into a trajectory with no second chance. Think about that for a moment. 8 seconds of thruster fire, 4 feet per second of velocity change. And those 8 seconds help define whether the heat shield meets the atmosphere at precisely the right angle. This is the kind of precision that spaceflight demands, not the dramatic, visible kind. The invisible kind. the kind where a measurement error smaller than the width of a pencil, calculated 200,000 miles away, determines whether 4 human beings survive. After the final correction burn, the crew begins preparing the cabin. Loose items are stowed. Equipment is locked down. The astronauts put on their Orion crew survival system suits, bright orange pressure suits designed to keep them alive if anything goes wrong during descent. And then comes the moment that changes everything. At approximately 7:33 in the evening Eastern Time, Orion's crew module separates from the service module. This is the point of no return. The service module, the cylindrical section, built by the European Space Agency that houses the main engine, the solar arrays, and the life support systems, is jettisoned. It will burn up in the atmosphere. It is no longer needed. All that remains is the crew capsule, a blunt body vehicle roughly 16.5 feet in diameter, carrying 4 people and a heat shield that has never been tested with humans aboard. From this moment, the crew cannot abort. They cannot fire an engine to pull away. There is no escape tower, no emergency option. The capsule is committed. It will enter the atmosphere. The only question is how that entry goes. And the answer depends on something that happened 4 years ago. In December 2022, NASA completed the Artemis I mission. It was an uncrewed test flight. Orion launched, flew to the moon, orbited for several days, and returned to Earth. By every visible measure, it was a success. The capsule splashed down on target, the parachutes deployed, the heat shield held, but when engineers recovered the capsule and examined the heat shield up close, they found something that did not match their models. Over 100 locations on the heat shield showed unexpected wear. The ablative material, gas called avcoat, had not eroded the way it was supposed to. Instead of melting away gradually and predictably, chunks of the outer char layer had cracked and broken off. Fragments of the heat shield had been ripped away, leaving behind a pattern of damage that no simulation had anticipated. This triggered an investigation that lasted nearly 2 years. And what NASA found was, in a way, more unsettling than the damage itself. The problem was not that the heat shield had been exposed to too much heat. The problem was a specific phase during the re-entry when the heat decreased. Here is what happened. And during Artemis I, the capsule used a skip entry trajectory. Think of it like skipping a stone across water. The capsule dipped into the upper atmosphere, used the drag to slow down, then climbed back out briefly before re-entering for the final descent. This technique extends the capsule's range and gives NASA more flexibility to target different splashdown zones depending on weather. But during the skip phase, when the capsule climbed back out of the atmosphere, something unexpected occurred. The outer char layer of the avcoat had been superheated during the first dip. It was still extremely hot, but as the capsule rose back into the thinner atmosphere, external heating dropped. The outer surface began to cool, and as it cooled, it became much less permeable. Meanwhile, the deeper layers of the heat shield were still undergoing pyrolysis, a chemical process where extreme heat breaks down the material and generates gas. That gas needed to escape outward, but the cooled, hardened char layer was now sealing it in. The result was gas pressure building beneath the surface, trapped pockets of hot gas with no way to vent. Eventually, those pockets blew through the outer layer, cracking it and sending fragments into the airstream behind the capsule. NASA had not predicted this failure mode, and here is the detail that makes it even more striking. Apollo engineers actually knew that avcoat had permeability issues. They accounted for it in their heat shield designs decades ago. But when the Artemis program reformulated the avcoat for modern manufacturing, the permeability characteristics changed, and that change was not caught until after the damage was already done. Now, the critical question for Artemis II was this: The heat shield on the Orion capsule that just flew around the moon is identical to the one that showed this damage on Artemis I. It was already built and installed before NASA learned what had gone wrong. So what did they do? They could not replace it. That would have delayed the mission by years. Instead, they did something that speaks to the ingenuity and the risk calculus of human spaceflight. They changed the way the capsule comes home. This is one of the most important details of Artemis II, and one that many people following the mission may not fully understand. NASA modified the re-entry trajectory. Instead of the standard skip entry profile that Artemis I used, the one that caused the heat shield damage, Artemis II is flying what engineers call a lofted entry. The capsule still makes an initial dip into the upper atmosphere, but the skip is shorter. The climb back out is briefer, and the final descent is steeper and faster. Why does this help? Because the problem on Artemis I occurred during the extended skip phase, when the outer char layer had time to cool and seal while internal gases were still building. By shortening that phase, the AV coat stays hot enough, long enough for gas to continue escaping through the char layer as designed. The material remains permeable. The pressure never builds. The cracks never form. NASA verified this approach through extensive wind tunnel testing, laser testing, and hypersonic facility testing. An independent review team agreed with the conclusions. Commander Reed Wiseman put it this way during a pre-flight briefing. He said that if you, as a human being about to board that rocket, had sat in the meetings the crew sat in and listened to the experts and gone through the data with them, you would have the same comfort they had. But not everyone agreed. Charlie Kamada, a former NASA astronaut, publicly warned that the agency should not have launched with the existing heat shield design. He wrote an open letter to NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman, arguing that the patterns he was seeing, an organization convincing itself it understood a problem it might not fully understand, resembled the patterns that preceded past catastrophes. He estimated the probability of a heat shield failure at roughly 1 in 20. Others, including physicists outside NASA, cautioned that humans are simply bad at estimating these kinds of tail risks. The odds may be better than 1 in 20, they may be worse. The honest answer is that no one knows for certain, because this exact configuration, this heat shield, this trajectory with humans aboard, has never been flown before. And that is what makes these final minutes so consequential. The crew knows the risk. Mission Control knows the risk. The entire engineering team that spent 2 years investigating the Artemis I heat shield knows the risk. And tonight, they are all watching the same clock. If you are watching this and you can feel the weight of what is about to happen, if this mission means something to you, or if you just want to understand what it takes to push the boundary of what humans can survive, then consider subscribing to Final Frontier Space. This channel goes deep on the missions that matter, with the kind of detail you won't find in a 2-minute news clip. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and come back for every chapter of this story. Now let's walk through what re-entry actually looks like. Not the simplified version, the real sequence, the physics, the timeline, the experience inside the capsule. At approximately 7:53 in the evening Eastern Time, the Orion capsule reaches an altitude of about 400,000 feet, roughly 76 miles above the Earth's surface. This is the boundary where the atmosphere begins to matter, where drag starts to build, where the laws of orbital mechanics hand the mission over to the laws of thermodynamics. At this altitude, Orion is traveling at approximately 25,000 miles per hour. That is about 32 times the speed of sound. For comparison, a bullet fired from a high-powered rifle travels at roughly 2,000 miles per hour. Orion is moving more than 12 times faster than that. And now the atmosphere is in the way. When an object hits air at that velocity, something extraordinary happens. The air molecules in front of the capsule cannot move out of the way fast enough. They compress, they stack up. The compression generates heat, not from friction, as most people think, but from adiabatic compression. The same physics that make a bicycle pump warm when you squeeze it, except scaled up to temperatures that approach the surface of the sun. The exterior of Orion's heat shield reaches nearly 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, metals lose their structure. Steel would soften, aluminum would melt. The heat shield's avcoat material is designed to absorb this energy by ablating, charring, decomposing, and carrying heat away as it erodes. And inside the capsule, just inches behind that inferno, the temperature needs to stay around 70 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Room temperature, survivable, human. That is the engineering challenge in its purest form. Outside, 5,000 degrees. Inside, 70 degrees, separated by a heat shield roughly 3 inches thick. At its deepest point, the crew will feel the deceleration as intense G-forces. In a nominal landing profile, they can experience up to 3.9 Gs. That means each astronaut will feel nearly 4 times their own body weight pressing them into their seats. Breathing becomes deliberate. Movement becomes difficult. Vision can narrow. And this is the phase where the crew is also the most isolated. As Orion punches deeper into the atmosphere, the superheated air around the capsule ionizes. The molecules break apart into a state of matter called plasma, a soup of charged particles that glows orange and white with unimaginable intensity. This plasma envelope is beautiful, and it is terrifying, because plasma blocks radio signals. During this phase of re-entry, all communication between the Orion capsule and mission control is severed. No voice, no telemetry, no data. For approximately 3 to 6 minutes, the crew is completely alone. Mission control can do nothing but wait. The astronauts can do nothing but ride it through. Victor Glover, the mission pilot, Ashwami described this experience before the flight in a way that captures the magnitude. He said he has been thinking about entry since April 3rd, 2023, the day the crew was assigned to the mission. 3 years of thinking about 13 minutes. And within those 13 minutes, the blackout is the part that tests something beyond engineering. It tests faith. Faith in the heat shield. Faith in the trajectory. Faith in every engineer, every technician, every decision that led to this moment. If something goes wrong during the plasma blackout, no one on the ground will know until the silence lasts too long. Picture the scene inside the capsule during blackout. The windows will glow with the light of ionized gas. The vibration will be constant and violent. The sound transmitted through the structure of the capsule itself will be unlike anything the crew has heard before. A deep, shuddering roar that comes from everywhere at once. And outside, Orion is wrapped in a cocoon of fire, descending at hypersonic speed toward an ocean that is still minutes away. The crew checklists are memorized. The displays are monitored. But in that stretch of silence, the mission belongs to physics and the heat shield and the angle of the trajectory and nothing else. This is what makes re-entry different from every other phase of spaceflight. In orbit, you have time. You can troubleshoot, you can communicate, you can make decisions. During re-entry, there is no time. There is only momentum, and you are either on the right path or you are not. And then, if everything has worked, the plasma begins to dissipate. The ionized gas thins. The glow fades from white to orange to a pale shimmer. The radio crackles. A signal breaks through, and somewhere in mission control in Houston, a room full of engineers who have been holding their breath for 6 minutes, hears the first confirmation that Orion is intact and the crew is alive. That moment, the moment voice contact is restored, is one of the most emotional in all of spaceflight. It happened during Apollo. It happened during Artemis I with the uncrewed capsule. And it will happen tonight with 4 human beings aboard. But the mission is still not over. When Orion emerges from the plasma blackout, it is still traveling far too fast for splashdown. The capsule is still high, still hot, still descending at enormous speed. Now the parachute sequence begins. First, a forward bay cover is jettisoned. This is the protective panel on the top of the capsule that has been shielding the parachute compartment throughout the entire mission, through launch, through deep space, through the fire of re-entry. It is blown away by explosive bolts, clearing the path for what comes next. At approximately 22,000 feet, the 2 drogue parachutes deploy. These are not the main parachutes. They are stabilizers. Their job is to slow the capsule from supersonic speeds down to roughly 307 miles per hour, and to orient it into the correct attitude for the main chute deployment. Then, at about 6,000 feet, less than 2 minutes from the ocean, 3 pilot parachutes pull out the 3 massive main parachutes. Each main canopy is enormous. Together they slow Orion from over 300 miles per hour to approximately 17 miles per hour. 17 miles per hour, from 25,000 to 17. That is the journey of the parachute sequence. That is the deceleration arc that turns a fireball into a landing. If any one of those stages fails, if a drogue does not deploy, if a main canopy does not inflate, if the sequence is off by seconds, the outcome changes drastically. But tonight, the engineering holds. The drogues deploy, the mains inflate. The capsule stabilizes beneath 3 massive canopies, swinging gently in the Pacific air, descending toward dark water at 8:07 in the evening Eastern Time, 5:07 Pacific. The Orion capsule, carrying Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen, hits the surface of the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego. Splashdown. The impact is not gentle. Water is not soft. When you hit it at 17 miles per hour in a capsule weighing thousands of pounds, the crew feels the jolt. The capsule rocks. It may tip on its side. It may right itself. Either way, it bobs in the open ocean, suddenly still after 10 days of continuous motion. Inside, the crew runs their post-landing checklist. Systems are powered down. Hatches are verified sealed. The survival suits are checked. And then they wait. Outside, a massive recovery operation is already underway. Navy ships are stationed in the splashdown zone. Helicopters from Helicopter Sea Combat Squadron 23 are inbound. Divers will approach the capsule. An inflatable raft will be deployed, and one by one the astronauts will be extracted from Orion and flown by helicopter to the USS John P. Murtha, where they will undergo post-mission medical evaluations. The airport in San Diego has diverted flights. Residents in Point Loma, Pacific Beach, and La Jolla have been warned of increased aircraft noise. The Pacific for a few hours belongs to NASA and the United States Navy. And in mission control in Houston, the flight director will confirm what every person in that room has been waiting to hear. Mission complete. Crew safe. Let's step back from the timeline for a moment and talk about what this re-entry means in a larger context. Artemis II is not just a mission. It is a proof of concept. Every system that brought this crew home, the heat shield, the trajectory design, the parachute sequence, the recovery operation, is the same architecture that NASA plans to use for Artemis III, when astronauts will actually land on the lunar surface for the first time since 1972. If the re-entry works, it validates the entire return profile. It proves that Orion can bring humans home from deep space. It proves that the modified trajectory can compensate for the heat shield's known limitations. It proves that the parachute system works under real mission conditions. And if anything had gone wrong, anything at all, the entire Artemis program would have been forced to stop and reassess. That is why these final minutes carry so much weight, not just for the 4 people inside the capsule, but for the future of human deep space exploration. The last time humans returned from the moon was December 19th, 1972. Apollo 17, Gene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt. They splashed down in the Pacific, and then for 53 years no one followed. Tonight 4 astronauts followed, and they came home through the same fire. There is one more thing worth saying, and it is perhaps the most important. We talk a lot about the engineering, the heat shield, the trajectory, the G-forces, the parachutes, and all of that matters enormously. But at the center of this story are 4 human beings. Reed Wiseman, the commander, who named a lunar crater after his late wife, Carol, a decision that moved his entire crew to tears in deep space. Victor Glover, the pilot, who said that riding a fireball through the atmosphere is profound, and who admitted he has been thinking about re-entry for 3 years. Christina Koch, the mission specialist who peered out of Orion's window and saw the Earth from a vantage point that only 24 humans in history have ever experienced. And Jeremy Hansen, the Canadian Space Agency astronaut, who proposed the crater dedication and who reminded the world that exploration is not just a national achievement, it is a human one. These 4 people climbed into a capsule on top of the most powerful rocket ever launched. They flew to the moon. They broke a distance record. They saw things no one alive has seen. And then they strapped in and trusted that the math, the materials and the engineering would bring them home through a wall of fire. That is not just a mission. That is an act of extraordinary courage. And it is the kind of story that reminds us why we look up in the first place. Deep space is spectacular. Re-entry is unforgiving. And Artemis II just proved that humans can still do both. If this story resonated with you, if you want to stay close to the missions that are shaping the future of space exploration, then do me one favor. Subscribe to Final Frontier Space. We cover every launch, every landing, and every moment in between with the depth and respect these missions deserve. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, and I will see you on the next one. This is Final Frontier Space, and the frontier is just getting started.